Hey everybody, Alex Miller, a Captain here, continuing a little bit of a mini series I have going. You might have seen my flurry of content elsewhere about how AI is probably not going to wholesale take your job. I don't think there's any mass unemployment coming. If you're worried about that, stop and go check out my other content. In this video, I will talk about the reasons why the AI revolution might really suck and be a bad time. And I think the story is something like people are worried about material poverty, and they should really be worried that AI is going to produce cultural poverty. I think good backdrop for this conversation, as I have mentioned elsewhere, there's a lot of history of automation going back a century and a half that I think provides a really good prototype for what we're doing now. I wouldn't say we're in a period of discontinuity. We're in a period of reflection about a very, very old trend that's already changed a lot of jobs that we now take for granted. But to kind of give a little bit of a teaser, if you were an artisan in 1850 and you came to present day, you might look at us like we are living in pretty gross cultural poverty now. And I'll explain what I mean. So there's three categories of miserable shit that may be coming that I'm going to describe here. The first is that AI is going to change your job. It's going to change your job so that kind of like an AI is your boss. Second, it's going to change what kind of goods and services we produce and sell. It's probably going to make them cheaper and crappier. And then finally, AI is going to give somebody tremendous power to own your mind. And a lot of people are worried about this now. You ain't seen nothing yet. Okay, so let me elaborate. I remember one. You look at the history of automation of physical work, and it tends to make people specialize. It tends to make people, now that they're specialized, they don't have the big picture, so they need more bosses. In general, it tends to produce a pretty steep hierarchy with a lot of this person has authority over that person. You can only get into my third bullet point and like, well, now there's a capital good somebody has to own in terms of the machinery that automates the production of the thing. And there's a lot of power involved in that. So going back to my artisan example, maybe it used to be that if you made shoes, you were a small business person, you had creative control of the shoes. And it was maybe a family business, you interface directly with your customers. A lot that's really nice about this from a human standpoint, right? Now that the world has changed, if you work in a shoe factory, maybe you do one thing over and over again all day. You have a big bureaucracy upstairs from you, run by the people that own the machinery that manufactures the shoes, that's on your ass about doing your one thing more faster all day. You don't have any creative control over the shoes. They're not even shoes. Like maybe you hate the shoes, you know? That could be what's about to happen to white collar work. So imagine you used to write science fiction, and now chatbots are pretty good at writing science fiction, but these things have warts, and maybe what your job turns into is, 0.1% of the time, the chatbot that writes the science fiction, somebody managed to troll it when they were training, and these kinds of things have happened. And it's a Nazi, like 0.1. It just gets excited about Nazi stuff 0.1% of the time. And that's a disaster for your employer, because once again, this is now a kind of machine operation with big-time capital goods. You read mediocre quality science fiction stories written by an AI all day to just make sure they have no weird Nazi themes in them. That's not as good a job as writing science fiction, in my opinion. Once again, comparing the shoe example, you don't have control. It's very repetitive. You have people kind of breathing down on you from upstairs. That's not a good time. And I think right now we're having a lot of fun with this. If you're somebody that has been writing blog posts like, oh, let ChatGPT write my blog posts for me, that's fun now. If the world changes so that that's your job, is just copy editing ChatGPT, I think it's not going to be fun long term. And now people are kind of surprised how ChatGPT is. Once it's your boss, you're going to notice ways that it's dumb and you're going to hate it. Or maybe you'll have a good time. I don't know. But your job's going to change. You'll still have a job, but it might not be as satisfying a job culturally as it was before. Okay, second, changes in goods and services. ChatGPT, well, why it's a big deal, and, as a businessman, I'm not knocking it. This is really exciting. You can churn out a whole bunch of science fiction stories for basically nothing compared to what you could do before. I don't know that those are going to be really epic, best of all time classics for quite a while. But, business incentives, it's going to make sense to do what you do to make money, and making money is going to be about selling a whole lot of kind of mediocre science fiction stories for really cheap. You're going to have trouble getting people excited about the economics of taking care to write a really good science fiction story. So here's an example. I live in an old city, St. Louis. We were the third biggest city in like 1880 or something like that. There's a lot of beautiful old homes here that are falling down in bad neighborhoods. Lots of beautiful external filigree ornamentation, beautiful wooden cabinets made by hand 150 years ago. It's not that we forgot how to build these things and put them on houses. It's just the economics changed, and it wasn't profitable to build houses like that anymore. In a lot of ways, because of automation technology for physical work, we chose to stop. And you don't see those things in new homes anymore. And that, once again, that's kind of like cultural poverty. Those were really nice cabinets. It's not the end of the world, but in some areas, we really have gone backwards because of automation. Finally, people talking about ChatGPT replacing Google. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. I'm a little skeptical, but Google is already under fire. Facebook is already under fire. These companies might own your mind too much. They might control your access to information too much. If you compare Google to ChatGPT, Google's ability to abuse this power is limited by that. They are just referring you to stuff outside Google. So if you have a little bit of discrimination, you want to break out of that situation, you've got a fighting shot. If you are using ChatGPT in that way, that is much more centralized, actually. Whoever controlled the training of that chatbot is totally controlling what it's feeding you. And they have that kind of disturbing control over your reality tunnel that we were worried a lot of these big tech companies have. And you've already seen a lot of people in maybe wholesome or unwholesome, depending on who you ask, ways have an intimation of this. And that we're already fighting over, well, does ChatGPT have a left-wing bias? Do we need a right-wing ChatGPT? We are going to yell at each other till we're blue in the face of who is a sort of sheeple captive and who is getting fed good information, but somebody out there is going to be a sheeple captive. And that's, once again, I would even call that maybe spiritual poverty. I would say if you're worried about what we have now, you should just not be sleeping for weeks thinking about ChatGPT and whatever's going to come after it. Because if it becomes the case that you're really dependent on that for your access for information, for how you do your work, those people really own your mind. So you're going to have a job. I would not worry about material poverty. In a sense, cultural poverty is something to be very afraid of if that's the kind of thing you value.